Jake stared out the window of the space station, the vast expanse of the galaxy stretching out before him. He had always been fascinated by the stars, but tonight, something felt different. The tension in the air was thick, and he could feel it in the pit of his stomach. This mission was unlike any other. The human alliance with the various alien species had been fragile from the start. Some races were eager for peace, but others were less certain. Jake, a soldier, had been assigned to this diplomatic mission, to ensure that things didn't fall apart. He was good at his job, but this was more than just combat and strategy. It was about trust. And that, Jake knew, was something that would take time to build. He had just arrived at the meeting room, where he was to meet with Zira, the princess of a powerful alien race. Her species, the Kira, was known for their wisdom and intelligence. They had been one of the most difficult species to negotiate with. They were calculating and precise, seeing diplomacy as a game of strategy, one that could turn dangerous if mishandled. Jake was no diplomat. He was a soldier, used to handling weapons and orders, not delicate negotiations. But he had been chosen for this mission because he had a knack for understanding people, even if they weren't human. And now, it seemed that understanding Zira was going to be the greatest challenge yet. Zira entered the room, her presence commanding immediate attention. She was tall, even taller than Jake, with dark purple skin that shimmered in the light. Her eyes were a piercing shade of silver, with a depth that seemed to look right through him. Jake had heard stories about her, how she had helped lead her people through a brutal war, how her intellect was unmatched, and how she had never been one to back down from a challenge. Seeing her in person, though, was another experience entirely. She wasn't just powerful, she was mesmerizing. Jake tried to act casual, standing at attention as she approached the table. He had to admit, he was nervous. This was a high-stakes meeting, and he needed to make a good impression. Zira didn't seem to be in a hurry. She moved gracefully, like she was in control of every step she took. There was no doubt that she knew how to command a room. "Prince Jake," she said, her voice smooth but firm, "I'm pleased to finally meet you." Jake gave a slight nod, trying to hide his anxiety. "The pleasure's mine, Princess Zira. I've heard much about you." Zira smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was calculated, as if she was sizing him up. "I hope I live up to the stories." Jake couldn't help but chuckle nervously. "I'm sure you do. But, to be honest, I don't think anyone can truly live up to the legends surrounding you." Zira's smile widened, and for a brief moment Jake felt like he had made a slight connection, but then she leaned forward, her eyes narrowing ever so, slightly. "Do you believe in legends, Jake?" Jake wasn't sure how to answer that. He had always been a man of action, not much for the mythic tales of heroism and glory. "I think actions speak louder than stories," he replied, meeting her gaze. Zira raised an eyebrow. "And what actions would you take to prove yourself?" "I wonder?" Jake was about to respond when a sudden, unthinking impulse overtook him. Maybe it was the tension. Maybe it was the strange connection he felt. But before he could stop himself, he said, "Well, marry me then. Prove that you're not just all talk." The words left his mouth before he could take them back, and the room fell into a heavy silence. Jake's heart skipped a beat as he realized what he had just said. It was meant to be a joke, a way to lighten the mood, but judging by the look on Zira's face, he wasn't sure how it had landed. Zira's expression didn't change for a long moment. Then slowly, her lips curled into the faintest of smiles. "Marry you?" she repeated softly. "That is quite the proposal, Jake." Jake's face turned red with embarrassment. He had tried to be funny, but now he realized how ridiculous it must have sounded to her. He wasn't even sure why he had said it. Maybe it was the stress, maybe the pressure, or maybe it was the way Zira's presence had made him feel out of his element. I didn't mean that," he stammered, running a hand through his hair. "It was just a joke. I'm not asking you to—" But before he could finish, Zira raised a hand to stop him. "It's fine," she said, her voice calm. "But you must understand, Jake, nothing is ever just a joke when it comes to diplomacy. Every word has weight. Every action carries consequence." Jake swallowed hard, unsure of what to make of her words. Was she just playing along, or was there something deeper behind her reaction? Zira leaned back in her chair, her eyes never leaving his. "Tell me, Jake," she said, her tone suddenly more serious. "What would you do if you were truly faced with a choice? Would you follow through on your words?" Jake was caught off guard. What was she getting at? His mind raced, trying to keep up with her sudden shift in tone. I don't know," he admitted. "I guess it depends on the situation." Zira's smile returned, but it was different this time. There was no mockery in it. It was almost like she was impressed. "I think we will get along just fine, Jake." Jake didn't know what to think. Her words left him speechless, and the uncertainty in his chest grew. He had never expected anything like this from a simple meeting. He had come here to help broker peace between their two species, not to end up in a strange personal challenge. As the meeting continued, Jake found himself wondering what Zira had meant. Was she serious? Was this just a test? Or had he, in his nervousness, opened the door to something much bigger? No matter what the answer was, Jake knew one thing for sure. This was going to be one of the most interesting missions of his life. Jake sat alone in his quarters, staring out the window once again. The stars twinkled in the distance, peaceful and unmoving. He should have been focused on the mission, preparing for the diplomatic talks, but his mind kept returning to Zira and the strange conversation they had. Her smile, her words, everything felt so different. "Marry you?" He couldn't stop hearing those words in his mind, echoing in the silence. What had she meant by that? Was it a test? A joke? Or was she actually interested in him? Jake shook his head, frustrated with himself. He had always been the type to focus on the task at hand, not distractions. But this wasn't like any other mission. This was Zira, the Kira princess. And despite himself, Jake felt drawn to her strength, her beauty, her intelligence. But that was dangerous. He had a duty, and that came first. Just then, his personal comm system beeped. Jake jumped, startled. He wasn't expecting any messages, especially not from Zira. But there it was, an encrypted message sent directly to him. He opened it, his heart racing. The message was short, but its meaning was clear. "Prove yourself worthy of my challenge, Jake. Meet me in the training hall at 800 hours tomorrow." Jake stared at the screen. A challenge? What did she mean by that? The words haunted him. He hadn't expected this. What was she trying to prove? Was this another game, or something more serious? The idea of facing Zira in some kind of test sent a shiver down his spine. He had joked before, but now it felt like she was serious. And Jake didn't take challenges lightly. He wasn't the type to back down from anything. But this was different. This wasn't a simple sparring match. It was with Zira, a being unlike anyone he had ever encountered. The next morning, Jake walked into the training hall, unsure of what to expect. The hall was massive, designed for intense physical and mental challenges. It was equipped with all sorts of alien technology, meant to test strength, agility, and endurance. Jake had no idea what kind of test Zira had in mind, but he knew it would be unlike anything he had faced before. Zira was already there, standing in the center of the room. She was calm and composed, her expression unreadable. She didn't even look at him as he entered, but Jake couldn't help but feel the weight of her presence. "You're here," she said, her voice smooth and steady. "I'm impressed." Jake stood tall, trying to appear confident, but his mind was racing. "What's this about, Zira? Why am I here?" Zira turned to face him, her silver eyes gleaming. You asked me to marry you, Jake. But before I make any decisions, I need to see if you're worthy of such an offer. This challenge is not about physical strength alone. It's a test of your resolve, your determination, your ability to make choices. If you want to prove that you are more than just a soldier, you will have to face me and yourself. Jake blinked, trying to process her words. You're serious? You want me to prove myself just for a joke? It was never a joke to me, Zyra replied. If you think your words hold no meaning, then this challenge will show you otherwise. Jake hesitated, his thoughts a whirlwind. This was unlike anything he had expected. He had been ready to negotiate, to broker peace. But now it felt like he was in the middle of something much more personal, something that went far beyond diplomacy. You're not the first human to challenge me, Zyra continued, her voice low and almost dangerous. But you may be the first to truly understand the weight of your words. Jake took a deep breath. He couldn't back down now. He had to show her that he wasn't just a man of jokes and bravado. He was serious. He had something to prove. What do I need to do? He asked, his voice steady. Zyra gave a small, knowing smile. First, you'll need to survive the trials of the arena. Then you'll need to solve a riddle that has puzzled even the brightest minds of my people. Jake's heart skipped a beat. He had expected physical challenges, but a riddle. That was something entirely different. He had always been good with tactics, but riddles, well, that was a different kind of challenge. The arena began to shift, the floor transforming into a series of obstacles, suspended platforms, moving, walls and traps designed to test speed, agility, and strategy. Jake's eyes narrowed. He wasn't a trained acrobat, but he had the endurance of a soldier. He could do this. Remember, Zyra's voice echoed through the hall. This is not about brute force. It's about how well you adapt, how quickly you think on your feet. Jake nodded, steeling himself for what was to come. The countdown began. 10, 9, 8. The moment the countdown hit 0, Jake sprang into action. He leaped over a set of moving platforms, dodging a series of laser beams that shot from the walls. He rolled under a swinging obstacle and ducked as a series of metal spikes shot up from the floor. His heart pounded in his chest, but he kept his focus. Each obstacle tested his reflexes, his strength, and his ability to think fast. He wasn't just surviving. He was learning. He could feel Zyra's gaze on him, watching his every move. Finally, he reached the last challenge, a locked door with a keypad. Jake quickly scanned the area, noticing a series of symbols etched into the wall. Next to it, he recognized the pattern from his training. This was a puzzle, and if he could solve it, the door would open. He worked quickly, matching the symbols to the correct sequence. The door clicked open, and Jake stepped through, breathless but triumphant. Zyra was waiting for him on the other side, her expression unreadable. You did well, she said, but the real challenge is yet to come. Jake wiped the sweat from his brow. He had made it through the physical trials, but now came the riddle. He could feel the weight of her eyes on him, knowing that the next test would be the true measure of his worth. Jake stood in front of the locked door, his breath still coming in heavy bursts from the physical trials he had just completed. His heart pounded in his chest, and his muscles ached from the exertion, but he didn't have time to rest. The door had clicked open, and now he had to face Zyra's final test, the riddle. Zyra stood calmly on the other side of the door, her silver eyes locked onto his with a look that sent a shiver down his spine. There was no sign of approval or disappointment on her face, just the same cold, calculating expression she always wore. But Jake could tell she was watching him closely, waiting to see if he had what it took. You've passed the physical trials, Zyra said, her voice smooth, almost clinical. But the final challenge will test your mind. Are you ready? Jake wiped the sweat from his forehead, trying to steady his breathing. He had made it this far, but now it was all about mental sharpness. He nodded, trying to mask the nervousness in his gut. "Let's do this." Zira stepped forward and raised her hand. The floor beneath them shifted, and the surroundings began to change. A strange, glowing pattern appeared on the floor, forming a large circle. In the center of the circle was a floating stone tablet with glowing symbols, alien characters he didn't recognize. "You see before you a riddle, Jake," Zira said, her voice now taking on a more serious tone. "It's not simply a test of intelligence, but of wisdom and patience. Solve the riddle, and you will pass. Fail, and the consequences will be severe." Jake felt a slight chill run down his spine. He had faced enemies in battle, but this felt different. He was used to fighting with his strength and tactics, but this was a battle of the mind, and he didn't know if he was ready for it. Zira's eyes flickered as she spoke again. "The riddle is as follows. I speak without a voice. I hear without ears. I have no body, but I come alive with wind. What am I?" Jake stood there, his mind racing. He repeated the riddle to himself. "I speak without a voice. I hear without ears. I have no body, but I come alive with wind." He stared at the glowing symbols, trying to make sense of them. His first instinct was to try and figure out the meaning of the symbols, but he quickly realized that wasn't the answer. The riddle was meant to be solved with pure logic. Zira's eyes remained fixed on him, waiting. She hadn't given any indication whether he was on the right track, but Jake knew time was running out. He needed to think, clearly and quickly. "I speak without a voice," Jake mumbled to himself. He paused. "Wind," he thought. "Wind doesn't have a voice, but it can make sounds." The answer was slowly starting to take shape in his mind, but he wasn't sure yet. He glanced at Zira. She was still silent, watching him. She didn't give anything away. He could almost feel the pressure of her gaze, like it was forcing him to dig deeper. Jake's thoughts continued to race. "I hear without ears," he whispered. What could hear, but not with ears? He looked around the room, searching for something, anything, that might give him a clue. And then it hit him. He stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the stone tablet in the center of the room. The answer was so simple, yet he had been overthinking it. "An echo," Jake said aloud, more to himself than to Zira. "The answer is an echo." Zira's eyes glinted as she tilted her head. She didn't respond immediately, leaving Jake to wonder if he had gotten it right. The silence seemed to stretch on forever, until finally, Zira spoke. "You are correct," she said, her voice soft but firm. "An echo is the answer." Jake let out a relieved breath. It was a small victory, but it felt huge. He had passed the test, and Zira hadn't shown a hint of amusement, disappointment, or surprise. She had remained calm, like she had expected him to succeed, but Jake knew this was only one step in a much larger journey. Zira's gaze softened for a fraction of a second before she turned and gestured toward the doorway. "You have passed the challenge, Jake. But there is much more to this mission than proving yourself worthy. Your strength, both physical and mental, has been tested, but now you must prove your loyalty." Jake frowned, feeling a sense of unease settle in. What did she mean by loyalty? Hadn't he already proven himself by passing her tests? Zira turned, back to him, her silver eyes locking onto his. "I trust you, Jake. But there is something you must understand about my people. We do not trust easily. I need to know if I can rely on you when the time comes, and that time is approaching faster than you might think." Jake felt a knot form in his stomach. "What do you mean?" Zira's expression grew serious, and for the first time since they had met, there was a flicker of something other than indifference in her eyes. "There are forces at play in the galaxy, Jake. Forces that seek to destroy everything we have worked for. I need you to stand by my side, not as a soldier, but as someone who will fight for peace no matter the cost. Jake's heart pounded. This was it. The real reason he was here. He wasn't just some diplomat or soldier. He was part of something much bigger, something far more dangerous. But as he looked at Zira, something inside him told him he was ready. He nodded, his voice steady despite the uncertainty. "I'm with you, Zira. I'll stand by your side." Zira's expression softened for a moment, and for the first time, Jake saw a glimpse of the real person behind the stoic leader. She gave him a small, approving nod before turning away. "Then let's begin." Jake followed her as they left the training hall, knowing that whatever came next, he had just taken the first step into a larger, more dangerous world. But with Zira by his side, he was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Jake followed Zira through the corridors of the space station, his mind still buzzing with the weight of the riddle and the physical trials. It felt like everything had changed in the blink of an eye. A simple joke had led him down a path he never could have imagined. And now, Zira was asking for more than just his strength. She was asking for his loyalty. The halls were quieter now, the hum of the station's engines the only sound filling the air. They passed a few other soldiers and alien diplomats, but everyone seemed to be moving with purpose, as if they had their own missions to attend to. Jake couldn't help but notice how different the atmosphere felt. It wasn't just about diplomacy anymore. It was about something bigger, something more important than any of them had realized. Zira stopped in front of a large door, her silver eyes flicking to Jake. She seemed calm, but there was an air of urgency about her. "This is where we must begin," she said, her voice low. "This is the war room." Jake stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest. He had no idea what was going on, but he knew one thing. Things were moving fast, and they weren't going to slow down. Zira swiped her hand across the door's sensor, and the doors slid open with a soft hiss. The room inside was dimly lit, with large holographic maps of different planets and star systems projected in the center. The walls were lined with alien technology that Jake didn't understand, but the seriousness in the air told him everything he needed to know. This was no longer a diplomatic mission. It was a fight for the future. Zira stepped into the center of the room, and Jake followed her, his eyes scanning the various holographic displays. He could see the outlines of the galaxy, with certain systems glowing red. His heart skipped a beat. The red lights were warnings, signals of conflict. A war was coming. Zira turned to him, her gaze sharp. "This is why I needed you, Jake," she said. "We have enemies who seek to destroy everything we've worked for. Our peace is fragile, and there are those who would rather see us fall than see us united." Jake didn't speak right away. He was still processing everything. The peace talks, the trials, and now this, the threat of war. It was all a lot to take in, but he could feel the gravity of the situation weighing heavily on him. He wasn't just fighting for his own survival anymore. He was fighting for the survival of millions of people across the galaxy. Zira continued, her voice steady but filled with determination. "The coalition we've formed is under threat. A faction within my own empire has begun to destabilize everything. They believe that we should return to war, that peace is a weakness. They want to divide us." Jake's brow furrowed. "So, your own people are trying to start a war?" "Yes," she replied, her voice calm but with a hint of frustration. "There are many factions in my empire, and not all of them agree with the path we've chosen. Some still cling to the old ways, the belief that dominance and conquest are the only answers." Jake felt a fire ignite within him. He had seen the horrors of war firsthand, and the thought of it spreading through the galaxy again made his blood run cold. But Zira wasn't just talking about war. She was talking about unity. She wanted peace, not just for her people, but for everyone. And Jake knew he couldn't let that slip away. "What can I do?" he asked, his voice steady now, his earlier uncertainty replaced by a sense of purpose. Zira looked at him with a quiet intensity. You have already proven yourself, Jake, but the real test is ahead. You will need to infiltrate the rogue faction, gather information, and stop them from carrying out their plans. You must be a diplomat, a soldier, and more than that, a protector of the peace. Jake nodded. It wasn't going to be easy, but he was ready. He had made it this far, and he wouldn't back down now. The stakes were higher than anything he had ever faced, but the more he listened to Zira, the more he realized that he wasn't alone in this fight. She had placed her trust in him, and he wasn't about to let her down. "I'm in," Jake said, his voice firm. "Tell me what I need to do." Zira's eyes softened for a moment, and for the first time, Jake saw a flicker of something more than just leadership in her expression. There was gratitude, yes, but also a quiet respect. She had known from the start that Jake would rise to the occasion. "We will need to move quickly," Zira said, her tone sharpening again. "The rogue faction will not hesitate to make their move. They've already begun to stir unrest in the outer colonies. They've gained support from powerful allies, and they have the resources to start a war. We need to act before they have the chance." Jake's mind was already working through the logistics. "How do we stop them?" Zira's gaze hardened. "We need to cut off their resources, expose their leaders, and prevent them from gaining any more power. But most importantly, we need to ensure that the rest of the galaxy knows the truth. We cannot allow them to manipulate the public, to twist the narrative in their favor. If the galaxy falls into chaos, there will be no coming back from it." Jake clenched his fists. It was a lot to take in, but the path ahead was clear. He had to act fast, and he had to be smart. Zira was right. This wasn't just a fight for one species or one planet. This was a fight for the future of the entire galaxy. Zira turned toward the holographic map, her fingers brushing the air to manipulate the controls. She zoomed in on several star systems marked in red, showing signs of growing unrest. "These are the areas we need to focus on," she said. "We will need to send agents to each of these locations, gather intelligence, and disrupt their operations. But it cannot be just anyone. I need someone I can trust." Jake felt a sense of pride wash over him. This was it. This was his moment. He had been chosen for a reason, and now it was time to act. "I'll lead the team," Jake said, his voice filled with determination. "We'll stop them before they can do any more damage." Zira nodded, her expression a mixture of pride and resolve. "I knew I could count on you, Jake." The mission had begun. The stakes had never been higher, but Jake was no longer just a soldier following orders. He was part of something much larger, a movement to protect peace, to preserve the future, and to ensure that the mistakes of the past would not be repeated. As Zira and Jake moved toward the next phase of their plan, Jake knew that this was just the beginning. The road ahead would be dangerous and they would face many obstacles, but together they would fight for the future of the galaxy. Jake stood on the bridge of the ship, his eyes fixed on the holo map in front of him. The ship hummed quietly beneath his feet as it sped through the void of space. He could see the glowing red markers on the map, locations where the rogue faction had already begun to spread chaos. The tension in the air was palpable, and it weighed heavily on his chest. "We have less than 12 hours. Zira's voice cut through the quiet. She stood next to him, her expression serious. "The rogue faction is making their move. They've taken control of a key supply depot on Tharsis 9. If we don't stop them, they'll gain access to weapons that could turn the tide of the war." Jake nodded, his mind working quickly. He had always been good under pressure, but this was different. The galaxy's future was at stake, and Zira was relying on him to act swiftly. "How do we get in?" Jake asked, turning to face her. Zira's silver eyes met his, and for the first time since they had met, Jake saw a flicker of something personal in her gaze, perhaps trust, or even something deeper. "We'll need to go in covertly," she said, her voice calm but firm. "If we announce ourselves, We risk tipping them off. We're going to need to infiltrate their base, disable their communication systems, and take out their leaders before they can organize a full attack. Jake's mind raced. It sounded like a suicide mission, but he knew there was no other choice. We don't have much time. How many soldiers do we have? Zira paused before answering, her eyes scanning the bridge as if looking for a solution in the space around them. We have a small team, elite soldiers, both human and alien, but we'll have to move fast. The element of surprise is our best weapon. Jake clenched his fists. The pressure was mounting, but he couldn't afford to show weakness. Not now. Then we move in at dawn, he said. We'll hit them hard and fast, no hesitation. Zira nodded in agreement. Agreed. I'll brief the team. Meet me in the war room in 1 hour. Jake spent the next hour preparing himself. He checked his gear, made sure his weapons were in top condition, and reviewed the mission plan. He couldn't afford to make any mistakes. Zira was counting on him, and he wasn't going to let her down. As he walked into the war room, he found Zira already briefing the team. She stood at the head of the table, a map of Tharsis 9 projected in front of her. Around the table were several soldiers, both human and alien. They were all experienced, and each one had a look of determination in their eyes. Jake took a seat at the table, his eyes meeting Zira's for a brief moment. She gave him a small nod, a silent gesture of trust. All right, Zira began, her voice cutting through the room. Our objective is clear. We infiltrate the base, disable their communications, and neutralize their leaders. We'll be moving in under the cover of night. Once we land, we'll split into teams. Team Alpha will handle the outer defenses, while Team Bravo will focus on the communications tower. Team Charlie... She paused, glancing at Jake. Jake and I will take the leadership compound. The soldiers around the table nodded in understanding, their expressions focused. This wasn't just another mission. It was a pivotal moment in the war for peace. We'll move out in 30 minutes, Zira said, her voice sharp with authority. We need to be ready for anything. Jake nodded, his heart beating faster. This was it. There was no turning back now. He had been in battles before, but none with stakes this high. He trusted Zira, and he knew she trusted him. But the weight of the mission pressed down on him like a heavy weight. As the team prepared to leave, Zira pulled Jake aside. I know this mission won't be easy, she said quietly. But I believe in you. You've proven yourself, time and time, again. Just remember, we do this for the future, for peace. Jake met her gaze, his resolve hardening. We'll get it done, Zira, together. She gave him a small, approving smile before turning to join the rest of the team. Jake took one last look around the war room, his mind focused on the task ahead. They were about to face the most dangerous challenge of their lives. But he wasn't afraid. He knew what he was fighting for. The team boarded the transport ships, and soon they were in the air, flying toward Tharsis 9. The planet loomed ahead, dark and distant. In the shadows of its surface, the rogue faction's base waited. Jake's thoughts raced as they descended toward the planet's surface. The mission was simple on paper: infiltrate, disable, and neutralize. But in reality, it was anything but simple. The rogue faction was powerful, and they had no intention of backing down. As the transport ship touched down on the planet's surface, the team quickly disembarked. The air was thick with tension, and Jake could feel his heart pounding in his chest. The dark sky above was filled with distant stars, but they had no time to admire the view. They had a mission to complete. Zira led the way, her footsteps confident, as she moved toward the entrance of the base. The soldiers followed closely behind, their weapons ready, eyes scanning the area for any signs of danger. They reached the outer defenses quickly. Team Alpha moved into position, taking out the guards, silently. Jake's heart rate quickened as they entered the base, moving through the dark corridors with practiced precision. Zira's voice came through his comms. Stay sharp. We're moving to the leadership compound. Once we're inside, we neutralize the leaders and secure the base." Jake nodded, his grip tightening around his weapon. The weight of the mission was pressing down on him, but he knew that this was their moment. There was no room for mistakes. As they moved deeper into the base, the sounds of combat grew louder. They had reached the heart of the enemy stronghold. The rogue faction's leaders were close, and Jake was ready to face them head-on. The base was silent. The only sound the steady footsteps of Jake and his team as they moved through the darkened corridors. They had entered deeper into the heart of the rogue faction's stronghold, and the air was thick with tension. Every corner could hide an enemy. Every shadow could be a trap. But Jake wasn't about to let fear take over. He had a job to do, and Zira was right beside him. They reached a large metal door, the last obstacle before the leadership compound. The door was heavily guarded, but Team Alpha had already neutralized most of the perimeter defenses. Jake and Zira stood in front of the door, the weight of the mission pressing down on them both. Zira looked at Jake, her silver eyes gleaming in the low light. "This is it. Once we go in, there's no turning back." Jake nodded, his pulse quickening. They were about to face the leaders of the rogue faction, the ones responsible for threatening the peace they had fought so hard to build. He wasn't just fighting for the galaxy anymore. He was fighting for a future with Zyra and for everything they had worked to protect. "Ready?" Zyra asked, her voice calm but firm. "I've been ready," Jake replied. He took a deep breath, pushing the anxiety aside. It was time to act. Zyra stepped forward, swiping her hand across the door's sensor. It slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a large chamber on the other side. Inside, several high-ranking members of the rogue faction stood around a large holographic map, discussing their plans in hushed voices. The moment they saw Jake and Zyra enter, their eyes hardened, and the room fell silent. "So, the princess and her pet soldier finally show up," one of the leaders sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. He was tall and muscular, with dark skin and sharp features that gave him a fierce, almost predatory look. Zyra's gaze never wavered. "This ends tonight," she said, her voice cold and commanding. "You have no place in the future we're building." Thus, Rogue Leader laughed, a low, mocking sound. "You think you can stop us? The galaxy will never accept your peace, Zyra. Power is the only language they understand." Jake's hand tightened around his weapon. He had heard these words before, the words of people who believed that strength and conquest were the only ways to secure the future. But he wasn't going to let them destroy everything he and Zyra had worked for. "We're not here to talk," Jake said, his voice sharp. "We're here to put an end to your plans." Zyra raised her hand, signaling the team to move into position. They had the advantage of surprise, and they weren't going to waste it. The rogue leaders reached for their weapons, but Jake and Zyra were faster. In a split second, the room erupted into chaos. Jake moved with practiced precision, taking down two of the rogue leaders with swift, clean shots. Zyra, with the speed and grace of a seasoned warrior, disarmed one of her attackers and knocked him to the ground. The remaining faction members scrambled to defend themselves, but they were no match for the combined force of Jake, Zyra, and the team. "Stay focused," Zyra called to Jake, her voice cutting through the chaos. "We need to take out their communications system. Disable their ability to coordinate." Jake nodded, pushing forward. The rogue leaders were reeling, but the main target was still in the center of the room, a large communication console that allowed them to send orders across the galaxy. It had to be destroyed. As Jake and Zyra moved toward the console, the last of the rogue leaders tried to make a desperate move. He lunged at Zyra, but Jake was faster. He tackled the man to the ground, his hands gripping his weapon as he restrained the leader. "Stay down," Jake warned, his voice low and steady. "It's over." Zyra was already at the console, her fingers flying over the controls. In moments, She had accessed the system and began to dismantle the communications network, cutting off the faction's ability to send orders to their supporters. The room fell silent once again as the holographic map flickered and went dark. "We've won," Zira said, her voice tinged with relief. She stood tall, her expression unwavering. "Their command structure is shattered. They can't regroup." Jake stood up, his eyes scanning the room. The leaders were either unconscious or detained, and the rest of the rogue faction's forces were scattered. They had done it. The galaxy had been saved from the brink of war, but Jake couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. "Is it really over?" Jake asked quietly, his voice betraying his doubts. "We've stopped them for now, but what if others try to take their place?" Zira turned to face him, her silver eyes reflecting the faint glow of the now dark console. "This is just one battle, Jake. There will always be those who seek to tear us apart. But as long as we fight for peace, we will keep winning." Jake looked at her, his heart heavy with the weight of everything they had just accomplished, and everything that was still to come. "Then we'll keep fighting." Zira smiled, a small but genuine smile. For the first time, Jake saw the person behind the leader, the woman who had fought for her people, who had carried the hopes of the galaxy on her shoulders. "You've proven yourself, Jake," Zira said softly. "Not just as a soldier, but as someone who believes in something greater than yourself. I'm proud of you." Jake's heart raced at her words. He had always known that this mission was more than just about defeating an enemy. It was about proving that peace could survive in a galaxy torn apart by war. And now, as he stood beside Zira, he knew that he wasn't just fighting for peace. He was fighting for the future, for something worth believing in. Zira placed a hand on his shoulder, her gaze softening. "Together, we'll build that future." Jake nodded, feeling a deep sense of purpose settle in his chest. The war wasn't over, but for the first time, he truly believed they could win. With Zira by his side, he was ready to face whatever came next. Together, they would ensure that the galaxy's future was one of peace, not war.